Teaching you some simple tips to simplify trigonometric expressions using the identities. So you have a problem here which asks you to express this in a single trigonometric function. Now, the basic step to simplify trigonometric expressions is to first express all your identities into sine or cosine. Okay, so as you can see, we have discussed some identities we have. We have the ratio, Pythagorean, the double angle identities, and the Pythagorean identities. This will focus on the Pythagorean relations and the reciprocal relations. Okay, so how do we express this as sine or cosine? Now, we know that cosine squared is the reciprocal of sine squared. So, therefore, we can express cosecant squared as 1 over sine squared. And we know that cotangent is the reciprocal of tangent being y over x. So, therefore, cotangent is x over y. And so therefore, it will be equivalent to cosine over sine because x is cosine and you know that y is sine. But because this is squared, we will have to do cosine squared all over sine squared. Now, when you're doing something about trigonometric expressions, my best advice to you is to go with the flow. If it asks you to add them. If it asks you to subtract them. Multiply. You have to go with the flow of the operations of the expression. So I would say that because there is really no specific steps to simplify trigonometric expressions. These are just my personal tips from my experience. So this one says that we will need to subtract. So therefore, remember that when we are subtracting rational expressions, if you have the same denominator, that is your LCD. So that's sine squared x. And of course, if that's your LCD, your numerators will also stay the same. Okay? And we know that this value, all right, we don't have any more operations to perform. It means that there would probably like identities that could identify us to 1 minus cosine squared. And we know that 1 minus cosine squared is equal to sine squared. So therefore, we can say that this expression is the same as sine squared all over sine squared. And a number divided by itself is equivalent to 1. Okay? Now let's go to as another problem about this one, the reciprocal identities. Okay. So let's say you're asked to find 1 plus tangent squared x is equivalent to which of these? So what we can do is, of course, express tangent as sine and cosine. So you have 1 plus tangent squared x. And we know that tangent is y over x. And we know that y is sine and x is cosine. So therefore, this is the same as 1 plus sine squared all over cosine squared. And again, we have to go with the flow. It says add, so we need to add. And we know that I have explained how to simplify rational expressions before. If you don't have the same denominators and they are relatively prime, you can simply cross multiply, or you can use the butterfly method. So you have here 1 times cosine squared is cosine squared, and cosine squared times 1 is cosine squared. And then 1 times sine squared is sine squared. So what we did here is cross multiplication or making use of the butterfly method. Now, since we don't have any more operations, we can't add cosine and sine. They are not similar expressions. There must be probably a certain trigonometric identity that could identify cosine squared plus sine squared. And we know it's equivalent to 1. So therefore, this is the same as 1 over cosine squared x. And we know that 1 over cosine squared is the reciprocal of secant squared. So therefore, you see your reciprocal relation here. Your cosine is 1 over secant, and your secant is also 1 over cosine. Since this is squared, we can identify 1 over cosine squared as equivalent to secant squared. In this situation, this is the answer. And we can submit the answer, or you can actually, if it's a multiple choice type of test, just write your first function here, okay, before I will submit, so that you would see you have 1 plus tangent squared, okay, 1 plus tangent squared x. And then you have, our answer is supposed to be secant squared x. They should have the same graph. So the one which gives you the same graph is actually the answer when you're identifying a multiple choice type of test. So therefore here, our answer is 1 over secant squared as was given to our solution. So again, when you're simplifying trigonometric expressions, first step is to change all your functions, all your trigonometric functions into sine and cosine. And then after that, you go with the flow and simplify. And I hope you have the skill to simplify rational expressions, because as you can see, it's important when simplifying trigonometric expressions. Let's see first if our answer is correct before I end this video. And as you can see, it's correct.